Hi everybody, good evening, welcome to the webinar. It is July 21st, 2016. Tonight's webinar is really what I've been thinking about lately, and I just had a visit to the field for a couple of days, and I actually changed the topic of the webinar after or partway through my visit out in the field when I was talking with Michael. It's something I've been talking about in service and something I've been training with our staff, and as I was working with some of the students and clients yesterday in my training of the staff and therapists, I found myself sharing with them the same principle, and I thought it could be shared with you. And I think it can be very informative for all of us as clients, as fathers, as mothers, as people. And so that's really where it's coming from. It's really my passion and my thought lately, something I thought about when I was teaching in service several weeks ago and has been sticking with me and developing. I want to talk about psychology and therapy. I want to talk about the difference between them. I had this idea that sometimes we do psychology on people, and sometimes we do therapy with people. And those are two different things. And to most people, to lay people, it's not well known what the difference is. And to beginning younger therapists, the difference isn't exactly clear. This is not a webinar I could have given 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It wasn't developed enough in my mind. I wasn't aware enough of the difference in the process as what I'm going to describe tonight. And the simplest way that I can distinguish between the two, and that's really what tonight's webinar is going to go on to talk about, is this idea between psychology being the study of human behavior and therapy being a process. Psychology is what happens when you go to graduate school and you learn a whole bunch of new terms and diagnoses and approaches and theories, and you bring that home to your family, to your friends, and you start diagnosing people. You start diagnosing yourself. You say things, you have these labels, and you say to people, you're being defensive, you're being resistant, right? And you have that knowledge, that awareness. And the thing about it is you're not wrong, right? Those things are correct. And as a parent, we can look at our children, and you're not wrong in your description of children, of their problems, of their issues, of their diagnoses. And those ideas are helpful in a context of therapy. And so that's what I want to talk about today, talk about the difference. I took some pictures while I was out there. I was just going to flip through a few of these first. I know you get a lot of these in your weekly letters, but this is what I was doing this week. And a lot of the clients one of the groups that I spent a lot of time in, I took some pictures of their jewelry. Some parents on here might even recognize their own child's work. This young man had found this stick that bent and that he turned into a dream catcher in the end, and he was weaving it. There's a student who has a couple of rings that that she had carved out of wood, and now they're soaking in vegetable oil. There's another student right there, a ring that he had made, and then somebody's spoons that they had made. Here's the staff staffing up. I'm standing over by the group right now, and the staff are staffing up at the end of Michael Griffin's shift. Like I said, psychology is the study of human behavior. It's the terms, the theory, the concept, the tools, and the techniques. Part of this came to me when I was watching some scenes from the upcoming play Wilderness that I'll talk about and give you an announcement for later on tonight. And there were a handful of scenes in the play that were depicted. And I don't know, because most of the play is adapted from interviews or direct observations. It's written and co-adapted by Seth Broccoli and Annie Hamburger. And so I don't know if the depiction was true or was through their lens and where that line was. But what I noticed was, and I shared this with them, was there were a couple of scenes when the staff did this thing with the client or the student where they just identified it. You know, there's a scene where a student is using flirtation to try to get a staff to help her build a shelter. And the staff simply stops and says, Elizabeth, I think is her name, you're using your sexuality to manipulate me. And that's what are men going to think of you? What are boys going to think of you if that's what you do in your life, if that's how you use your sexuality? And it was very plain. It wasn't punitive on the surface. But when I watched that, the way that it rubbed me, and I shared this with the writers, I said, that's not the ideal. That's not what I would want to train them. That's not the way that I would want to respond. I'm sure there are moments when we all respond to people like that. But and the suggestions that I made, the notes that I gave to them, were I would want you to respond. I would want a staff to respond and say, hey, what's going on? What are you doing right now? And how is this working for you? And I'm concerned it's not working for you and it's not working for me. I don't feel okay. It was much softer, much more compassionate, much more kind. It wasn't just the label. It wasn't just the idea. It was a different kind of relationship, a relationship that was gentle, loving, respectful, and curious, right? Therapy is a process. Therapy is a relationship, a way of being with somebody that encourages them to grow and to heal. That's the biggest difference. Psychology is all these terms, and I'll talk about it in a minute when I go into depth in therapy. Therapy is healing. Look it up in the dictionary. Most definitions start off with some sort of healing. Psychology doesn't do it. It's just one of the tools that therapists use in therapy to help and facilitate healing. But it doesn't do it for us. I talked about this in in-service this week with both of our programs in the last week. The tools, and this goes for you and your tools and your concepts that you learn, they don't do it for you. The I feel statement doesn't fix things. It's a tool to help you get awareness. It's a tool to help build a bridge and connection. It's a tool to learn how to hear somebody. Right? It does all those things. But if in the mind of the user there's something more insidious, like trying to control the other person or change the other person, guilt the other person or shame the other person, if it becomes that, then it's just as ineffective as any form, any tool that we could use. And like I said to the staff this week up at Cascades, I said, if you love, in fact I said this to the clients in the group, if you love each other, then it's hard to get it wrong if you have these tools. If you don't do it from a place of love, you're not feeling and showing love, you can't do it right. It won't work. Psychology is something that lay people can do. Somebody with having read a book, right? Having a bachelor's degree. And I think that applies to us as parents, right? It applies to me even as a therapist, that I can fall into that way where I learn all of these tools, these techniques, these theories, and I apply them. And this is most important. When I'm doing psychology on somebody, this is very important. I'm not acknowledging my own process, my own wound, my own anger, my own judgment, my own disappointment, right? I use psychology on people in this way that I'm describing to distance myself from it and to make them the problem. If somebody shows up in my life depressed, right? In my life as a client, in my life as a friend, in my life as a family member, if they show up depressed, that's them. That's what they are. But how I respond to them, right? How I react to them, my relationship to them, that's where the challenge or the success comes. That's why I say parenting children who are struggling, the struggle isn't in the child. The child just has ADHD or drug addiction. That's them. That's their struggle. The real struggle, the struggle that we focus on, is how do I relate to that? How am I in relationship to my child and their problems? And to get clear about that, to own that, to see my part in it, to make any kind of progress or success in relationships, that I have to go inside of me. That's the heroic journey. I have to look at my thought processes, my feelings, right? I got to make sure that I don't make my frustration about them, right? My lack of capacity, my inability to be compassionate because I'm in pain, because I'm a human being, because I'm limited, all those things. I've got to make that not their problem. I said on here, many therapists do it. I do it when my capacity is taxed. I do it with my family, right? I call it weaponizing. I've weaponized all of the psychological tools that I share with you at times in my life, right? And I do it again to distance myself, to protect myself from hurt. It's easy to do, and therapy is not easy to do. Therapy is incredibly hard, real therapy. Psychology, not that hard to do. Not a very personal, not a very intimate experience, not a very healing experience for either person. But doing therapy is transformative for both people. Doing therapy for me as a therapist, in the moments that I'm doing it and doing it well, it is absolutely transformative and expansive. It's expanding me. Like I said, and I do this to illustrate the process. My capacity with my children, with my wife, with my friends, with my coworkers, with my employees, with my clients. My capacity today in 2016 is much greater than it was in 2006. And I hope in 2026 it's even that much greater. I hope I continue to expand in my capacity because it still has its limits and its boundaries. And I want that to continue to get larger and larger and larger until I'm done. Most people, I said this, one of the young men asked me this week, he said, what percentage of your clients and students at Evoke get to air phase? And I gave him a number that I said I haven't done the research, but anecdotally it's probably different for every group. And for me, I said it's between 10 and 20%. And he asked why so small, and I've shared this on webinars before, and I said, because there's a problem with air phase. There's a problem with it in the way that I've seen it with my clients, my students, is that the natural tendency for somebody is to think they've arrived. And I said, the most dangerous thing that we can do, parents do this all the time, is have the fantasy that there is a place to arrive at. Right? That we can be done learning. That we can accomplish all that we need to accomplish. And so I don't want, and I said, oftentimes when I've given it as much of a challenge. And I've rarely seen air phase. I've rarely seen it have more of a positive effect on the client or student than I have had it be a challenge. It's been more of a challenge than it has been a benefit to their treatment process. And so part of what I was trying to teach him was this process of all of us expanding, continuing to learn, continuing to grow. I met with several of the groups this week, and I haven't always done this, and I'm going to do this now. Normally I go out with a therapist and I train one therapist and stay in one group, but as I was driving out in the field, I thought I'm going to stop at each group for a few minutes and just say hi and introduce myself. And I told them what I do and told them about webinars and other things that I do, and most of my work being parent work. And what I said to them is, it's my job to help your parents realize that they're insane. When I can do that, everything improves in the family. And I talk to them, and I say kind of tongue-in-cheek to be funny and facetious, but I say it really is. If I can help parents accept it without shame, without blame. In fact, if they can let go of that whole paradigm and they can just say, I'm a project. I'm a project still in process. Then it's going to be better for them and better for you. They're going to suffer less with your struggles, and they're going to be more effective in supporting and encouraging growth and healing in you. So anyway, that's a little bit off track, but it's that idea that I'm trying to tell them that I'm trying to encourage you to never arrive. And that parents, I see, I don't know what percentage it is, but a good percentage of parents, when they start at Evoke, some of them have the sense that they arrive. They don't say it that way, but they might say, and I honestly don't think a lot of them show up on the webinars as much as the ones who don't. I do believe that. But the ones who show up, they often don't attend the webinars, will say something like, why is it about me? I'm not the one with the problem. And they're right. Going back to the right thing. They're right. The psychology is right. They don't fundamentally have the symptomology, right? They're not failing in school and their jobs and lying to people and stealing and cutting and avoiding work in school. They're not doing all that stuff, right? But they're missing the point. They're missing what is their work, that there is even work to do. And that's okay. And that does not diminish the amount of help that the child needs. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight. I thought a lot this week about the myth of being right, that chapter out of my book. In fact, I walked into the group, and I walked into the middle of a process. They were having an informal sitting group, and I don't know the before, but I can kind of take bits and pieces to tell you what I think happened. Basically, what I think happened is one of the clients asked the staff if they could play a game, an active game. They call it Dogs. It's this game that they do, and you have to run around. And he wanted to do it in his camp shoes, which are those Crocs. You know, they give the feet a lot of air, and the air dry out, and you can wear them around camp. And the staff said, well, our boundary is you have to wear your hiking boots. That's safer. You know, you could trip on a rock, you could catch yourself, and it's just a lot safer in boots than it is in these open shoes. that we use around camp. And there seemed to be some pushback because maybe another staff member had let him do it, hadn't enforced that boundary, and the student was giving him feedback and trying to get him. And as I walked up, that's all before I got there. That's my best guess. And so as I walked up, one student was giving feedback to the staff. The staff was listening. And part of his feedback was, it doesn't sound like you're open. It sounds like you're trying to be right. He started talking in this language like, I think you're trying to be right and you're trying to make him wrong. And it was calm. In fact, later on, he got some positive feedback from the group that he wasn't as reactive as he often was in the group. But I told him this later. I felt scared. Not terrified, but scared. I thought, oh, this feels really unsafe. The way that he's talking. And the safety issue for me was, it feels like an us and them thing. Right out of the bat. And I didn't even know what the content of it was. So they finished this up, and he got some positive feedback for not being as reactive, and the staff said that he would talk to the therapist in the group and consult with the other staff, and then he would get back to them. And then later on in the day, when I was in this young man's session, I happened to sit in his session later on, both in his session and in a group interaction, what I noticed was he had some awareness around that right and wrong thing. I told him this too, and I said, but you're doing it. Like that, I can feel it. I told him I was scared, which he was surprised by. That I was afraid when I came into the group. And I said, I think you're living by that paradigm. That's the best I can tell. And my sense beneath that is you're feeling scared. And you're feeling powerless. And I checked it out with him, and he confirmed some of that. It was very clear when we were talking about a certain situation. And I said, if you could just tell me that, if you could just tell me you're scared and feeling powerless, that's so easy to respond to. But when you're using this tool, this idea, this concept, and ironically trying to be right by attacking my need to be right, my defensiveness, I said, I don't feel safe in that process. I just want you to know. But when you can talk, not influenced by your fear, right? But when you can talk from your fear, about your fear, I'm there. I'm with you. I'm connected. And I gave him the analogy or the metaphor that I often use, which is, it's the difference between Darth Vader and Yoda. They both wanted order in the universe. They both wanted what they thought was the right thing, which was good. They wanted what they thought was good and right. Darth Vader was about controlling others. And Yoda was about self-mastery. And Yoda allowed feelings to come. And Darth Vader tried to prevent them from occurring, right? Darth Vader's wife died, and that's where he put on the mask. And he put on the armor, if you will. And then he set about trying to dominate and control other people. Yoda grieved and felt and showed up and looked at himself. And by the end of the day, this young man said, I'm going to try to practice a Yoda way this week and not a Darth Vader way. Interesting later on, because this is where I'm coming to. That was just really all background to, I saw this interaction. We were doing, they call it a yellows group, which is at the end of a therapist's day, he or she might sit with the group and go over their assignments for the week. The shared assignments, that group assignments and things like that. So everybody kind of knows everybody's work. What's the work for the week? What are you working on? How can I support you? That's one of the questions they ask at the end of it. How can we support you? And at one point, one young man said something, and the other young man, the same young man that I'm talking about, just called him on something. Said, you didn't do that this week. And they got into a little standoff, and he said, I don't want feedback from you. And then he said, well, you give me feedback, I don't want feedback from you. And so I watched it go on for 5 minutes or so and listened. And I said, sounds like you were hurt just then. And it sounds like you don't trust him. It sounds like both of you don't believe that the other one cares about you and that you're coming from a place of caring. And so there's no way either one of you is going to listen to the feedback from the other person. And the feedback you each have for each other, it's not inaccurate. It's accurate, actually. You're right. And this goes back to the right. Being right is one of the greatest pitfalls, right? Being right is armor that we wear. And I'm not saying being right is wrong. I'm just saying it's a way of being in relationship to people that doesn't work, that doesn't invite, that doesn't disarm. And so while this idea that I'm sharing psychology versus therapy has application to therapists and staff training, as it does, it also has issues, it has ideas that overlap with our interaction with all of us. And psychology is about being right in facts and tools and techniques, and on paper it could pass. But that's not therapy. Alice Miller said in The Drama of the Gifted Child, the therapist may cloak his disapproval and derision behind abstract terms like borderline, obsessive, regression, destructive, but unless he explores the 3-year-old boy inside of himself, he will not see the parallel between these terms and garden variety contempt. It's simple and powerful and profound. So let's translate that to us as parents also. And I happen to be both a therapist and a parent. The parent may cloak his or her disapproval behind terms like borderline, depressed, addict, right? School failure, dishonest, self-destructive, impulsive. The list can go on and on. But until that parent looks at the 3-year-old inside of themselves, they won't be able to see the similarity between these terms, these diagnoses, these descriptions of their children, and just garden variety contempt. Right? That's our work. Doesn't matter where in this process, where in this relationship, where in this system you look, that's all of our job. And I'm going to get to therapy in a minute, but I just want to say this. It changes people. I can't say it more clearly except for to say therapy changes people. And I train therapists and I watch them sometimes. And when I present my approach, which is compassionate and less directive and less attacking and less confronting, and it's gentle and it's curious and I have thoughts and ideas, but I don't tell them the way that it is. I also talk a lot about, in general and sometimes specific, my own struggle with all of these things in a way to kind of disarm them and say, you're not the only one who's struggling. I'm with you. This isn't top down. This isn't, I've got it figured out and I'm the expert. This is, I'm in it. I'm in this fight. Would you like to come join it with me? I'm in this struggle, this life struggle, this journey, this path. I want to invite you, show you what it's like. It's so much better than that journey. That journey's suffering and miserable. And I know it's tempting. I've been drawn to the Darth Vader. I get drawn every day. I walk the Darth Vader path at times during the day, often. But this other way, this Yoda way, this Jedi way, it is absolutely easier and has less suffering to it. Therapy, like I said, looking up the definition, there's all kinds of therapy. Speech therapy, physical therapy. It's healing. That's what therapy is. It's a different process. Therapy understands that how I hold you in my mind, how I think about you, is more important than anything I do. And that's one of the hardest parts to teach. It's one of the hardest parts to sell to new therapists and to parents. Right? It's hard to get people to stop worrying about the answer to the question, what do I do? I do supervision with our therapists and our staff every week. And I constantly go back to this and say, I hear what they did and I said, tell me your thought behind that. Tell me what was going on for you. That's the supervision, right? What was going on for you? So when we're doing supervision, we're not saying what technique. Once in a while, we give a few ideas and techniques for interventions. That's the side salad, if you will, to the meal. But the meat of the meal, right? The core of the meal is what was going on for you. Sounds like you were frustrated. Sounds like you were scared. Sounds like you were anxious or overwhelmed or angry. That's not about the student. That's not about the client. And then we go as far as they want to in supervision back to, and they don't have to get very personal. It's not therapy necessarily, although it has its parallels. But to get people, just like the parents that I work with, to get them to look at their piece, what's going on for them, and understand if they can unravel that a bit, they can be so much more effective. And I'll say to them, this way of looking at it, looking at yourself, actually has better results of the same things that you want, right? Letting go of some of this stuff actually gets you what you want. Holding on to it tighter, fighting it more, and you lose it. That's why it's doing less sometimes, not doing more. And one of the students, when I shared with them, and again, I never specifically, I always think of my field visits. Sometimes I'll visit a specific client for a specific reason, or usually I'm training one therapist, doing supervision with one therapist. But I thought, I want them to know. I want them to know about tonight's webinar. I didn't know what it was going to be about at that time, but I want them to know that it exists. I want them to ask their parents about it. All of you who attend this, you're going to be excited to report to them. I watch it. I've watched it. I've watched some of the archives. The parents that don't show up ever, and some don't show up, are going to have the question asked to them by some of their children. Do you watch the webinars? I met this guy named Brad Reedy. Have you watched any of this? He told us about the parent portal. He told us about this idea. One girl said to me, my mother wrote in the letter, she had it in her hand, she said, my mother wrote in the letter and said that Brad Reedy says that all parents failed their children and that I failed you. And she was excited about it. This girl had a smile on her face. And again, it wasn't power and control and blame and see, I told you. It was joy. Right? It was connection. It was love. What a generous thing for a parent to say to her child, which is, I've realized that I've failed many times. I realize I still struggle and make big mistakes. What a generous, loving gesture that we can do only well when we're not asking for something back. That's what a gift is. In psychology, they define gifts in this way. Gifts are when you give without expectation of anything back in return, including gratitude for the gift. You don't give it so that it'll be great. And if the person's ungrateful, it doesn't faze you because you didn't give it for that. When it does faze you, then you can. I was talking to a parent about this week. When we have those moments where we get upset at the way that our gifts are received or how they're used, that we give to other people, that's a sign that we had some other intent in it, that we had some agenda in it. Right? I know that. And I said to this parent that I was talking to, I said, it happens to me all the time. And if I'm honest with myself, I then have some awareness that I really wasn't giving. I really was manipulating. I was really giving a payment for something in return. It was really a contract that I didn't make clear or didn't even know of, that wasn't even conscious of. Therapy, like I said, is not easy for lay people to see. I remember my first supervision session, and one of my first supervision sessions and supervisors, Dr. Brandon at Loma Linda University, during my master's degree. And I remember him, I've said this story before, where he stopped the videotape of my session. We videotaped our sessions. And the first time he stopped, he said, "Why did you say that?" And I responded. I was scared. I thought I did something wrong. Because, in my life, when someone asks why you did something, they're not curious. They have a point to make. They're about to teach me something and show me how I did something wrong. They're just waiting to ambush me after I get my answers. Dr. Brandon paused it, said, "Why did you do that?" I answered, and then he pressed play. Then he paused it a few minutes later, asked what I did. I answered, and then he pressed play. And after about the fifth or sixth time, I thought, oh, he's actually teaching me. He's asking me to be aware of what was going on inside of me and what was my intent. And there's times in our supervision where he said, I have an idea here. What if you did this? Or if that's your intent, here's something I've done that helps to communicate or facilitate that intent. Right? There was some teaching that went on there. But the first thing that he was asking me was to be aware of my relationship to the client and their issues. How was I interacting with them? What was my motivation? What was my thought process? Therapy is a risky business, right? There's a chance that I'm involved in it. I'm present. I can get hurt, right? I can have my capacity tapped out. And most importantly, I'm going to learn as much as the client in many cases. And that's true for me. There's a quote that I share with people often when I say, if you're not learning as much as your clients, you're doing it wrong. And again, using that parallel of being a therapist and being a parent, and I'm both, if you're not learning as much from the interventions and the work and the treatment that your children are in and your involvement in, if you're not learning as much as they are or more, you're doing it wrong. It's true. I want to talk about the word containing. It's an idea. Containing is a term from analytical theory that just means how I hold you in my mind, right? How I conceive of you, right? Containing is something we do in our lives. If you walk into my living room and you tell me a story, you're asking me to contain it. You're asking me to hold it, to not yell at me for it, to not yell at you for it, to not judge you for it, to not try to change it, right? Ideally, you're asking me to tolerate you. So containing is how we tolerate the other. Do we tolerate them easily? Is it difficult? Do we tolerate them with love? And so this is a very technical quote. In this situation, the contained is more or less fully felt and understood by the container. At the same time, the container can rely on additional resources to feed back to the contained a wider sense of the contained experience. Along with this is the experience for the contained that the container can adequately accept and manage what has been offered to be contained. Very technical language from analytic theory, but it is just to say, I see you. Not your diagnoses. I see that too. Not the label, not the defense mechanism. Of course I see that too. But I see more than that. Right? When this young man yesterday, whom by the way, I absolutely felt, I asked Griff, I said, because I didn't attend all of Griff's sessions, I said, did you save him for me specifically? Because I was spending my morning in some of the other groups. I said, did you save him for me specifically? He said, no, it's just a coincidence. And I said, he's my favorite. And one of the things I said to him, I said, you're going to give so much to this world. You have so many gifts to give out to the world. I can't wait to hear about them someday. And this kid deserved to be here. You know, he earned it. But I could also see that other side. So we see all of that. We see the hurt, right? If you show up at me aggressive and angry, and I have this capacity that this quote is describing, I don't see aggressiveness and anger. I don't feel a need to defend myself from you. I see your fear and your sadness and your hurt. I see some kind of story where you're feeling powerless. You're feeling scared. And so you want me to feel the same thing. And like it says in the Letters of Juliet, the book I love, what we do to protect ourselves hurts other people. And I can see all of that. Right? You hear things differently. That's why parents ask me, is it okay for your child to swear at you? My response is, you get to decide that. It doesn't bother me most of the time. Sometimes it does. Sometimes I have no tolerance for it. But most of the time, my thought is, oh, you have something really important to tell me, don't you? I need to listen. I can tell you're really upset. Please talk to me. You have my attention, right? That's what I do in my better moments. In my more limited moments, I talk about respect. I talk about treating me with disrespect and not liking that language, right? That's what I do. And I want to tell you something. Using that as an example, that way of talking is less effective at getting rid of swearing, getting to the heart of the matter, and healing. That's the irony of it. That other, the former approach of noticing that they're hurt and feeling powerless and scared and upset, and I want to understand it, that makes the swearing go away faster and facilitates the healing more. So ironically, it gives you what you want instead of getting on the battlefield of who's right and who's wrong. How we think about our children is how they will think about themselves, from the book. And that's my idea, right? I realized it one day when I was doing some of this work, that it wasn't what you say to them. It never has been what you say to them. And that's what's so confusing for people. It's how you think about them. And we're not even aware of how we think about them until we get into this business of therapy. We're not aware that our anxiety our fears for them, when it overwhelms us, when it becomes thematic, is our belief that they're fundamentally flawed and broken and not okay. Right? That it is that they're not going to be okay. And the interpretation that they make from that, the way that they internalize that is, I'm bad. Something's wrong with me. And I'm making the person who loves me the most terrified. I've got to be bad. Now, it doesn't mean don't be anxious. It means own it as yours. And it also doesn't mean, gosh, this is really important, I would be scared if I was in your place too. Right? Parents hear me say that principle, and they think that I'm telling them, don't be afraid that your kid is cutting on themselves. No, that makes sense. Makes sense. Don't be afraid that your kid is using illicit drugs or is depressed. Of course. But that's your project to work on. That's why you go to Al-Anon and Families Anonymous and CODAs and therapy. That's why you attend these webinars. That's why you get a parent coach, right? That's why you do that. So that they can take care of you. They can hold you. They can contain you. So then you can come back to your child with more capacity, with more of a reservoir. It's a holding. It has compassion. I talked a lot about, I remember one of my therapists, Cody Schuler, at Second Nature, talked about this idea of trying to teach parents to approach their children with more curiosity. Right? If you can learn the practice of replacing your fear and anxiety with curiosity. And it's hard. And our children are fantastic at provoking in us fear and anxiety and frustration and anger. Containing is non-reactive. I've said this before. I'll use the cutting example. If my children were cutting, that would be hard. I would be scared. It's interesting though, when I meet your children and they're cutting, I'm much more curious than I am scared. I'm much more interested in the pain and less likely to react from that frightful place, that fearful place. That's why I can be more effective than you. And that's why I've said many, many times in these webinars, you could be more effective with my children. Right? And a lot of their, because you would have fewer triggers in some of the areas that I would have triggers. Therapy is, how can I be helpful, is more important than what I think you need to do to change. How can I be helpful? You know, when a client shows up, any person shows up in my life, in a session, in a circle, and they show up with pathology. And I see it. And I see I have some ideas and questions about where it comes from and why it's there and where's the wound. All of that stuff comes to my mind. I try to move slowly when I'm doing therapy. And like I said, I don't always do therapy. I move slowly. Right? I have people watching sometimes, my staff, my therapist ask me questions like, why didn't you say something? And my response is, I didn't think they needed it. I think right then they needed me to listen. They needed somebody to not be afraid. They needed somebody who was curious and not anxious to change them. And that's the way you get it to work. That's the way you get that thing that you saw to heal and to go away. So the question of how can I be helpful, the thought of how can I be helpful becomes more important than the thought or the idea of what do you need to do to change. It's about finding, hearing, seeing, and understanding. My therapist is writing a book called Seeing, about this task of why it's so difficult for therapists. She's writing about primarily, but I'm sure she'll talk about others. For therapists to see people. Why it's so difficult for parents to see people. And you know, and I have that all the time, right? That's my work. Half of the time I'm talking with a parent, I'm just giving them my eyes and saying, this is what I'm seeing. That's what works so wonderful in our program at Evoke. We watch them and we tell a story, right? We tell a story about your child. And that story asks certain things of you in it. It asks you to show up differently, right? It asks you to provide support and structure in a way that can be helpful going forward. That's the story. We find that story. And we tell it from our perspective. One of our therapists who's a musician and artist, she has a lot of art in her stories. Another therapist that I can think of is incredibly cerebral and intellectual, and he has a lot of theory and words that I don't even understand sometimes. Right? We tell the story to you from the child. We tell the child the story too, and sometimes we tell them your story. But we tell them a story where everything makes sense, where the way that they're showing up makes perfect sense. And the way that they're showing up asks a certain kind of response from you to be helpful. That's what we do. We provide you, and hopefully, what I hope in the long run, I really do hope in the long run, is that we teach you how to see. And we teach you what gets in the way of your seeing. Right? And if we can teach you that, that's what my book is about teaching you how to think differently. If we can teach you that, and you don't have to be perfect at it, I'm sure not. If we can teach you that way, then we give you a project to work on for the rest of your life. And you're going to succeed and fail at it. And hopefully when you fail at it, you'll apologize and own it and come back to it because you'll have moved past some of the shame. I notice in the role of a teacher in my program, the programs that I run, I notice that something that gets in the way of it often is people try to impress me with what they know. Right? People that I'm there to train try to impress me with what they know, and I get it. I do that too. I wrote a blog about that on my own website not too long ago, where I did that in New York City. But I told them this week, I said, that's not what this is about. It's not about that. I love you. I'm already a fan. You're hired. And if the ego can go out of it, right? If it cannot be about being good, if it can be about what do I have to learn, right? Then we can accomplish something here this week, today, what it is. Not containing looks like or has in it often frustration, anger, disappointment, anxiety, fear, and judgment. These are all signs that we're losing the container, right? That we're losing connection to the other. It's like that quote from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that I've quoted, where he said, if we could read the secret history of each man's life, we would find sufficient sorrow to disarm all hostility. Or when Abraham Lincoln said, I do not like that man very much, I must get to know him. This is what enlightenment is. Right? This is what those people who have incredibly improved their capacity, right? The Gandhis and the Mother Teresas of the world. Right? I think the Pope, he seems like that kind of a person. When you enlarge your capacity like that, you don't have a reason to be mad at somebody who's hurting and who's showing up then in a way that looks really sick and really hurtful to others. In fact, it doesn't hurt you anymore because it's not about you. Right? In my best moments, I know when somebody's being really hurtful, and I can think of a very specific thing can come to mind where somebody did something incredibly hurtful to me, objectively speaking, and it didn't hurt at all because I knew it wasn't about me. Some of what they did had truth in it about me, but how they used it to attack me, I felt no anger. I felt sad. I felt compassion for them, and it wasn't a technique I was using. It just didn't hurt because it wasn't about me. Those are my best moments. Like I said, these ways facilitate change more than being right, more than doing psychology on people, more than giving all the knowledge from all the books that you have. From my book, quoting Dr. Goddard in our program, to the extent you try to control your children, you fail at influencing them. We respond to the child's behavior out of fear, frustration, and anger, and it becomes less about helping her grow and more about our own catharsis. And we would be wise to first listen to what the behavior is telling us before we launch into changing it. Right? In fact, often I go on to say in that same paragraph, by listening to the behavior, it tends to change. By understanding and seeing it, we provide healing. And healing is what changes behavior, not symptom reduction, not behavioral reinforcement. Those are some of the tools that we use some of the time. That's not the thing that changes everything. The myth of being right. It is a slippery one because we are right. And it also, that paradigm, if you want a refresher on that, go back to the chapter in the book, go to the webinar on the myth of being right. That paradigm that sets us up in a relationship that's based on power, not on surrender, intimacy, openness, and vulnerability and connection. We learn about healthy boundaries when we do therapy. We learn that boundaries are about taking care of me, not changing you. Boundaries are about making me feel okay, not I don't do them to you to change you. I do them to me so that I feel emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically at peace. And then you can learn to respond to them. I set boundaries in my house. Rules, if you will, in my house. Rules in my life to take care of myself. And those rules, those limitations, are something that you can respond to one way or the other. I had this idea, and I think this is true both for the children that you send to us, but I think about it for my own therapy as a client, and I see it in others also, that what therapy is when you begin it is not what it is later on. Melanie Klein said that the false self brings the real self into therapy. Right? We come into therapy with this idea, usually to fix something else, right? Or maybe to develop some skills to manage, cope a little bit better. And then if we stick with it, if we don't give up, we learn it's about transformation and enlargement and healing. And then nothing outside of us changes, but everything changes. Like I've said a few times now, facilitating or encouraging change is by healing it, not by changing the behavior. And then I've talked about it the entire time. Therapy, this idea of therapy, psychology can inform therapy. And therapy and the process that I've described tonight can inform our lives as parents, as spouses, partners, children. Right? It can inform us. And if we can, I read a book years ago called Living Your Yoga, where it's not about going to yoga and doing the exercises and practicing a moment of mindfulness, but it's changing. It's a intensified practice for a short period of time that we do if we do yoga that changes the way we are in relationship to the world, and that's what this is. That's what my experience of therapy is, and I expect I will have a webinar 10 years from now that I could not do today because I don't have the words and the capacity. All right, I'm happy to answer any questions, any comments before I go on to upcoming. I have a special one upcoming announcement that I will share with you in a little bit. Evoke seems to have a relational approach to therapy, trying to find what hurts find out what hurts our underneath behaviors. What are your thoughts about going from this type of program to an aftercare program that is behavioral, that employs steps that clients have to go through for rewards? Are programs that try to affect intrinsic change to relationship versus programs that corral the client to right behavior a better choice after Evoke? We have levels. We have reward systems on here. We have some of that stuff here. That's not the problem. It's not. I've told this story before where I was attending a lecture that my therapist was giving at the University of Utah, and she was teaching some of what I'm teaching today to them and telling different stories, and she was shining a light on the same concept essentially. And one of the young students raised her hand and said, "Yeah, but I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist." And then she goes on to kind of explain. And our therapist let it go, and I sat there and we've talked about this now for years later. This does not preclude 12-step work, behaviorism, cognitive behavioral, right? It doesn't preclude dialectical behavioral therapy. It doesn't preclude anything. This has to happen on top of it. This is about how much you care about or judge your client. This is about how much awareness you have about yourself. So what techniques or model that I use, that's just my vehicle. But if I don't have this stuff that I'm talking about tonight clear, Doesn't matter what model it is. It's not going to work, right? And if I have this stuff sorted out and I'm not very skilled, that's going to have some absolute limitations also. So this is not about an approach or a style. This is about a way of being in relationship to others that applies no matter what kind of technique or approach you're using. Our son states that he has been over-therapized and is not open to continuing any therapy at home where he is now. How can he continue to heal from his addiction and depression without therapy? Could it be that he just needs a break, or is that he is too avoidant of his pain? I don't think he knows what therapy is yet. Let me answer the big question, and I'll go to yours. I'm going to answer the big picture question here, and then I'm going to go to your specific question. If your son said that to me, I would ask him about it. I would ask him about what he means and what does it mean to be therapized and what hurts him and what's exhausting him, right? I would ask him about all of that. And if I did a good job and spent enough time and was patient enough, he might be able to figure out how he's hurt, and then I would validate that. And I would say that makes sense. I can understand why therapy would be a miserable, exhausting place for you to be. Right? It makes sense. And I would also say, and I guess I assuming maybe as a young adult, maybe he is avoidant of his pain. And I would get to make decisions as his parent around whether I was comfortable supporting that level of structure and still supporting him at home, right? I would get to choose that. But I think if he can heal it and work with it and get to it, he's going to love therapy. One of the clients said this week, I don't know if I've ever heard, he said, I think I'll go to therapy for the rest of my life. He said, why would I ever stop going to therapy? Which is something I say all the time. I've been going, I had a professor in graduate school say to us, he said, sometimes you just got to stop going to therapy and live your life. I don't think that professor knew what therapy was. I think he was he was the nicest guy in the world. I think he was tremendously defended. Right? I think he had a pretty narrow, limited, it's like saying, it could be the pain, but if I am the container and he says that to me, if I'm his therapist, let me just put it this way. If he says that to me in therapy, I say, okay, makes sense. And then I ask him questions, just like I said. If I'm his parent, I still ask him what's going on and why and understanding. And then I set a boundary that I feel good about, which is I may support this and I may not. And I don't try to be right. And I don't use this idea of he's too avoidant of his pain to prove to him that I'm right and that he's wrong. And that he should and needs to go into therapy. And this is why, right? That's that other way. I set a boundary and I say I might be wrong, but this is my boundary. And I set it where I want it. So, all right. The new announcement is the play. Here's some pictures as it performed in Florida, University of Florida, a couple weeks ago. So, the save the date is October 26th. That's the opening night gala on October 20th. So we're going to be there. The Evoke partners, a few therapists, program people are going to be there. Spouses are going to be there. So the gala opening night is October 26th. We're going to send out an invitation to all of our webinar subscribers, all of our current parents, all of our alumni actually, coming up. So it's the 26th, it's opening night, and then on the 27th we're going to ask for RSVPs and have a deadline where we're going to all just have a social breakfast for a couple of hours where we're going to mingle. We might do a little talk or speech from some of us. The night of the gala there's also going to be a panel of speakers. I'll be one of those speakers on that panel. You can go to onguardarts.org to continue to get your own information here, or you can contact them there. That's the producer of the play. Or you can go to Facebook or our Facebook and find the link to their Facebook page. All right. I got to update that. I keep forgetting to do that. There's the upcoming workshops. One just passed. I saw some great comments on it. We want all parents to go to workshops if they can. Finding You, our personal, or heroic journeys are for families. Finding You, our personal workshops that you go to for your own growth, for your deeper work. You're going to your own therapy, small groups, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people in those groups, and we spent 4 days doing a lot of deep psychodrama, family of origin. Go to 12-step groups. These are free. We want you to go to 6 of these while your children are with us. If you haven't started yet, start. They're really uncomfortable. It's going to be outside of many of your comfort zones. You're going to have a lot of the same reactions to your your children had to coming to our program. So if nothing else, it gives you empathy for that kind of a thing. Here are the upcoming. I'm going to be in Toronto next week. Cassidy Miller is going to be doing the Chicago. She's a fantastic therapy from Cascade. She's going to be doing the parenting meeting in Chicago next week. I'll be in Los Angeles on August 7th. Notice on that one, it is a Sunday, and there's a potluck. We changed the format so that people could deal with the Los Angeles traffic. So we hope that version of it is a success. Social media. Follow us on social media, quotes, announcements, inspirational stuff. Go to the blog. Here are our pursuits trips. These are high adventure for families or young adults. And so you can go to our website, but I thought I'd list some of them so you can get an idea about what they look like. The book on paperback, Parent Alumni Foundation. Buy books there. 10% goes to the foundation to help people that can't afford treatment. Any more questions before I close up tonight, Michael? All right, folks. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's helpful point of contact. Because I'll be in Toronto and I have some things going on different next week, I apologize for that. That's what summer looks like sometimes. The next webinar will be a week from tonight, the 28th. It'll be at a different time, 5 p.m. Mountain Time. So that's really early for our Pacific Coast families. You can watch it, of course, recorded later. But 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time, it's probably a relief for our East Coast families who are always staying up late for these. So have a great week. Take care of yourselves and enjoy being with you tonight. Bye-bye.